My parents destroyed my 29th birthday dinner and slapped me with a $120,000 invoice. But I just smiled and watched their perfect family crumble. It all started with the phone calls. 53 missed calls from my mother, 42 from my father, and 28 from my sister Sarah. They had been bombarding my phone since Friday morning. And here I was, Monday afternoon, still refusing to answer. Every call, every voicemail, every desperate plea, they all went unanswered. It's not like I didn't care. It's not that I didn't understand the weight of what had happened. But after what they did, I was done. Let me take you back to Thursday, my birthday. The day it all began to unravel. They insisted on hosting a big family dinner for me. At first, I thought it was a nice gesture. They hadn't done anything like that in years, and I guess I was flattered by the thought. But then, my mom Rebecca kept emphasizing how important it was that I arrived at exactly 6:30 in the evening. She even told me to dress well, as if this were some formal event. I arrived at 5:55, 15 minutes early, thinking I was being considerate, but when I pulled into the driveway, my stomach sank. There were cars everywhere. At least 18, lined up and scattered down the street. This wasn't just family, it was a whole crowd. As I walked inside, the sight hit me like a punch to the gut. Relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, and even friends I hadn't seen in years. It looked more like a wedding banquet than a birthday dinner. I noticed Sarah standing by the door, wearing a strange expression. She wasn't smiling like everyone else. She simply motioned for me to follow her to the dining room. My parents wanted to make an announcement. I assumed it would be some awkward toast, maybe a slideshow of embarrassing childhood photos, nothing too serious, right? I followed her into the dining room where my father, Edward, stood at the head of the table. He clinked his glass, signaling for everyone to be quiet, and that's when I knew something wasn't right. His tone wasn't cheerful. It wasn't celebratory. It was cold, almost official, like he was reading from a prepared statement. He started talking about how they had raised me, about all the sacrifices they'd made for me over the years. The words felt rehearsed, like he was putting on a show for the crowd. It wasn't a speech for a daughter, it was a lecture. Then Rebecca stood up and walked toward the wall where family portraits hung. I couldn't move. I watched, confused, as she ripped down my high school graduation photo and tossed it in the trash. Then another photo, and another. Each time, she spat out words I couldn't comprehend. You were always ungrateful. You never appreciated what we gave you. You're a failure who drained us dry. The room was dead silent. No one moved, not even a whisper. My grandmother was sitting with her palm over her lips, her face expressionless. My cousin, who had been recording on his phone, didn't seem to care. The humiliation was suffocating. My parents, my own parents, were humiliating me in front of our entire family. Then, as if that wasn't enough, Edward handed me a manila folder. I opened it to reveal a printed document, bolded at the top, "Invoice for parenting services rendered." The list that followed went on for pages. Diapers, formula, school supplies, auto insurance, college fees. It detailed everything they had supposedly spent on me over the years. And at the very bottom, there it was, the total, $120,000. He said they'd wasted every penny raising an ungrateful child who never amounted to anything. He gave me two options: repay them in full or never contact them again. He told me they were done with me, officially cut off. As if that wasn't enough, Sarah stepped forward and grabbed my car keys from me. I was stunned. I had been driving the car, but it was still in my father's name. He explained that the car was going to her now, because she needed it more than I did. And that's when I saw him. David, my supervisor from work, sitting quietly at the far end of the table. I had no idea he was invited. He stood up and walked over. He told me he'd had a long conversation with my parents earlier that week, and based on their feedback, he was firing me. He said my work ethic wasn't up to par, and my parents had shared their concerns with him. I should clear my desk on Monday. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even question why. I just stood there in disbelief, looking around at the relatives and family friends who had come to see my downfall. The humiliation was beyond anything I could have imagined. I stared at my parents, my sister, and David. Then, without a word, I turned around and walked out. I called an Uber from the sidewalk. and the drive back to my apartment felt like the longest of my life. But this isn't where the story ends. It's only just beginning. What they didn't know was that I had been planning for something like this for years. I walked out of the house, feeling the weight of the night press down on my chest. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, and I could hear the distant hum of cars driving by. It felt surreal. My heart was pounding, but my mind was oddly calm. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just left. When I got into the Uber, the driver didn't say a word. The silence in the car felt like an echo of the quiet I had just left behind. I couldn't help but think about how my parents had stood there, acting like they had every right to humiliate me in front of all those people. I could still hear my father's voice, cold and detached, listing all their so-called sacrifices. It wasn't the first time they'd made me feel like I was an ungrateful failure. They'd been doing it for years. I had spent my whole life trying to live up to their expectations, only to be told that nothing I did was ever enough. When I was younger, I tried. I did everything they asked. I went to school, I studied hard, I stayed out of trouble. I did everything they thought was right. But the more I tried, the more they seemed to want more. My father, Edward, had always pushed me. He wanted me to go to medical school. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps, to be someone who could be proud of. But I wasn't that person. I had never been. I wasn't interested in the life he envisioned for me. I wanted something else. I wanted to make my own way. I wanted a career that was different, one that made me feel fulfilled in a way that his vision never could. And then there was my mother, Rebecca. She wasn't as outwardly demanding as Edward, but her expectations were just as crushing. She pushed me into the social scene she thought was appropriate for a girl like me. She tried to make me fit into a mold that was never mine to begin with. She wanted me to join the country club, to date certain people, to be the perfect daughter, the perfect reflection of the perfect family. When I started making decisions for myself, their approval slipped away. I chose a different path than the one they had laid out for me. I didn't follow their ideas of success, and I didn't conform to their version of a happy life. They couldn't understand it. It frustrated them. It angered them. But they didn't know how to deal with it, so they tried to control me in other ways. The last few years had been the worst. My parents had become more distant, more critical. Every time I made a choice that wasn't what they expected, I felt the tension growing between us. They would criticize me, question my decisions, tell me I was wasting my potential. It was like nothing I did would ever be enough for them. I stopped going to family gatherings. I stopped attending church with my mom. I stopped dating the people they wanted me to date. I started to distance myself. But every step I took away from their expectations, they pulled me back in with guilt. And now, that guilt had exploded. It wasn't just a quiet disapproval anymore. It was a public spectacle. They wanted to punish me for not being the daughter they had dreamed of, for not living the life they had mapped out for me. They didn't just try to teach me a lesson. They wanted to break me. As the Uber took me home, I couldn't stop replaying the dinner in my mind. The way my mother had ripped my photos off the wall, throwing them in the trash with such ease. The way my father had handed me that invoice, like it was just another transaction. My heart ached, but I wasn't about to let them win. I couldn't go back. Not now, not ever. When I got home, I immediately locked the door behind me and sat down. I needed to think. I needed to process everything that had happened. But it was already clear to me that this was the breaking point. I had spent too many years trying to please them, trying to be what they wanted me to be, and look where it had gotten me. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. They had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. I pulled my phone from my bag and turned it on. The screen was flooded with missed calls and voicemails. I didn't listen to a single one. I didn't need to. I already knew what they would say. They would apologize, beg for forgiveness, claim that things got out of hand, but it was too late for that. They had made their choice. Now, I was going to make mine. I started making a plan. I wasn't going to just let this go. I had to do something. I had to make sure they knew the consequences of their actions. They couldn't get away with this. Not again. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of resolve. It was time to take action. I stared at the manila folder in my hands. The edges curled slightly from where I had gripped it so tightly. The words on the invoice were seared into my mind. Each line an insult, each figure a reminder of how little they thought of me. $120,000. That was what they claimed I owed them. For the life they gave me, for all the sacrifices they made. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more about control than any actual amount of money. I could still hear my father's voice, detached and cold, as he handed me that paper. "Repay us, or you're cut off," he had said. "We've wasted enough on you." His words rang in my ears, over and over, long after the dinner was over. And I realized then how far gone they were. It wasn't just the money they wanted. It was everything. My life, my decisions, my choices, none of them had ever been enough for them. They had created a perfect little narrative for themselves, and I wasn't fitting into it anymore. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it all. One moment, I was just trying to have a nice dinner, trying to keep up the act that I was still a part of their perfect world. And the next, they had completely destroyed everything. But that was the thing, this wasn't just about a dinner. This wasn't even about the invoice. It was about everything I had tried to hide for years. Over the last few years, I had become more aware of just how much of my life had been manipulated by them. I'd always been the good daughter, the one who did what she was told, the one who kept the peace. But every time I took a step toward independence, every time I made a choice that wasn't aligned with their vision for me, they pulled me back. They made me feel like I was worthless, like I owed them everything. And now they had crossed a line. I knew what I had to do. They thought they could control me, thought they could force me to follow their script. But I wasn't going to play along anymore. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There were certain family members I knew would listen, people who hadn't been completely sucked into the narrative my parents had spent years weaving. I started with a few simple messages. Nothing too dramatic. Just questions. Little things that didn't seem important at first glance but would make them think. "Do you remember when Uncle Michael was supposed to get that $15,000 from Grandma's will?" I typed. "Do you know why he never got it?" I paused for a moment, rereading the message. It wasn't a huge accusation. It was just a question. But the questions would start to pile up, and I knew sooner or later people would start asking the right ones. I moved on to the next message. Aunt Laura mentioned that she never saw any of the money from the house sale after Grandma died. Did you ever hear anything about that? My hands trembled slightly as I typed, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. I sent the messages and sat back on my couch, the quiet of my apartment surrounding me. It was almost surreal how calm I felt. After years of trying to keep the peace, years of burying my frustration, I was finally doing something about it. I wasn't letting them control the narrative anymore. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. I knew there would be fallout. But I was ready. The calls started the next morning. I had known they would. They didn't call to apologize, though. They called to demand. They were furious that I hadn't answered their messages, that I hadn't called them back. Rebecca was the first to leave a voicemail. Her voice was tight, controlled, but there was a note of panic underneath. "Elena," she said, her voice strained. "We need to talk. What's going on? This isn't how it was supposed to go. You can't just walk away from your family like this." I didn't call her back. Edward's message came next. "This has gone too far. You need to come home and explain yourself. We'll talk about this, but it needs to be done in person. Don't make things worse than they already are." Again, I didn't respond. I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to play their game anymore. The day passed slowly, and I spent most of it sitting in front of my computer, going through old family records. My parents were meticulous about their finances, always keeping track of every penny, and it wasn't hard to find what I needed. I had been there before, combing through paperwork when I was younger, helping my parents organize things for taxes or whatever other adult task they decided was my responsibility. It made sense now why I had always been their go-to. I found the old will, the one that stated Uncle Michael was supposed to receive that $15,000. But he never got it. And it wasn't because the estate didn't have enough money, like Edward had claimed. No, there had been plenty. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of the evidence I had found. This was just the beginning. I didn't know how long it would take for things to unravel, but I knew it was going to happen. The lies were too big. The manipulation had been going on for too long. They thought they could bury the truth, but I wasn't going to let them. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I didn't respond to my parents' calls. I didn't respond to my sister Sarah's desperate messages either. It wasn't that I didn't care about them, it was that I couldn't. Not after what had happened. The thought of hearing their voices again, begging me to forgive them, made my stomach churn. Instead, I stayed in my apartment, pacing back and forth. The silence around me felt oppressive, but I couldn't bring myself to turn on the TV or play music. It seemed too easy to ignore what had just happened. My thoughts kept circling back to that night, to the coldness in their voices, and to the way my father had handed me the invoice like it was just another business transaction. "Repay us, or you're done," he'd said. Those words echoed in my head, over and over as I tried to make sense of everything. I hadn't been prepared for it. How could I have been? Sure, I knew my relationship with them had been strained for years, but this was something else entirely. I never imagined that they would go this far, that they would make me feel so small, so insignificant, in front of the entire family. But I wasn't going to let it break me. No. I was done being their pawn. I had been playing by their rules for so long, trying to be the good daughter, trying to meet their impossible expectations. But this wasn't about being a good daughter anymore. This was about being true to myself. I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't just sit here, drowning in self-pity, letting them dictate my life. I had already made up my mind the moment I walked out of that dinner. The question now was how far I was willing to go to make them see the consequences of their actions. The first thing I did the next morning was go through the records I had pulled up the night before. My fingers traced over the papers as I found more discrepancies, things that didn't add up. I had already uncovered the missing $15,000 from Grandma's will, but there was more. I found an old bank statement showing a large sum of money withdrawn from an account that didn't quite match the family's story. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the documents spread out before me. This wasn't just about an inheritance. This was about years of manipulation, years of lies that had been covered up with smiles and polite words. They had built their perfect family on a foundation of secrets. And now, I was going to tear it all down. The phone rang again. I looked at the screen. It was my mother. I stared at it for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen. I wanted to pick it up. I wanted to yell at her, ask her how she could do this to me, to tear apart everything we had. But I didn't. I couldn't. I swiped the call away and listened to the voicemail she left. Her voice was shaky, soft in a way that I hadn't heard in years. "Elena, please," she said, her words almost too difficult to make out. "This isn't you. I know we've had our differences, but you need to understand that what happened. It wasn't meant to be this way. We didn't mean to hurt you. Please, call me back. We need to talk." The words stung. They were exactly what I expected to hear. The same excuses, the same manipulations. They couldn't just accept what they had done. They had to paint themselves as the victims. I didn't respond to her. I didn't even listen to the rest of the message. I knew where it would go, and I wasn't interested in hearing it anymore. Instead, I turned my attention to the legal matters. I started drafting an email to the probate court, asking for a copy of the documents related to Grandma's estate. It didn't feel like enough to just sit on this information. I needed to make sure people knew. I needed to make sure that this wasn't swept under the rug like everything else had been for so long. I knew there would be repercussions. I knew that if I pushed too hard, things could spiral. But I didn't care anymore. I had already lost my family's approval. I had already been cut off. What else did I have to lose? As the days passed, the calls didn't stop. They came in waves: Rebecca, Edward, Sarah, each of them trying to get through to me. They left voicemails begging for my forgiveness, trying to explain themselves, telling me I was being unreasonable, that they were only trying to teach me a lesson. But it didn't matter. I wasn't going to forgive them this time. I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story. Each time I heard their voices, the more resolute I became. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the truth. By the time Friday morning came around, I had a plan. I wasn't going to sit in the background, letting them twist the narrative. I was going to force them to face what they had done. It was time to take the next step. I spent the next few days carefully laying out my plan. I wasn't just going to sit around and let my family brush everything under the rug, pretending like nothing had happened. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about exposing the lies that had been told for years, and making sure that others in the family knew the truth. The secrets had piled up too high, and I wasn't going to let them keep pretending. I started small. The first thing I did was contact a few relatives. Uncle Michael was an easy one to start with. He had always been a little more open-minded than the rest of the family, and he didn't always fall for the perfect family narrative my parents pushed. I messaged him. "Hey, do you remember when Grandma left you that $15,000 in her will?" I knew it was a long shot, but I had to ask. "Did you ever get it?" His reply came a few hours later. "I never got it. I thought I was supposed to, but Edward told me the estate didn't have the money after paying the bills." I never thought to ask again. I felt a rush of vindication. He had been lied to, just like me. I knew this was only the beginning, but it felt good to know that I wasn't alone in questioning their story. The next step was Aunt Laura. She had always been a bit distant, but I knew she would be a crucial part of this. I sent her a message asking, "Do you know what happened with the sale of Grandma's house? I remember you mentioning something about not seeing any of the money. Did anything strange happen?" Her response was immediate. "I thought I was getting half of the sale, but after all the expenses, I barely got anything. Rebecca told me everything was settled, but I'm starting to wonder if there's more to it." Each response I got made my stomach churn. It was like opening a floodgate, and I realized just how much I had buried. All those little questions, all those inconsistencies, suddenly felt like pieces of a much larger puzzle. The story wasn't just about my parents' manipulation, it was about years of financial deception that they had carefully kept hidden. And I wasn't the only one who had been kept in the dark. By the time I had messaged a few more relatives, I started to see a pattern. My parents had done the same thing to each of us, pulling the strings from behind the scenes, controlling the narrative, making sure they were always in charge. And now, finally, I had proof. The more I investigated, the more questions I had. Why had my parents been so secretive about the inheritance money? Why had they taken the college funds for themselves? What else were they hiding? I knew I had to do more. It wasn't just about getting the truth out to the family. I had to make sure they couldn't cover this up. I needed to take it one step further. The next day, I spent hours poring over old documents. I pulled up bank statements from years ago, looking for discrepancies. My parents were meticulous about keeping records, and I knew I could find something that didn't add up. I wasn't disappointed. There it was, an unexplained withdrawal of over $100,000 from an account that was supposed to have been used for family expenses. It was all there in black and white, clear as day. I sat back, staring at the screen. This wasn't just about the missing $15,000 anymore. This was about years of mismanagement and lies, and now I had the evidence to prove it. I took a deep breath and made a decision. It was time to take action. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me any longer. I wasn't going to let them control my story, my family's story, any longer. I gathered my evidence, prepared my case, and started drafting an email to the probate court. It was time for them to hear the truth. It was time for everyone to know what had really been going on. The phone rang again. It was my mother. I didn't answer. I couldn't bring myself to pick up the phone and hear her try to justify what they had done. The voicemail that followed was predictable. "Elena, please, we need to talk. I know things got out of hand, but you have to understand. We were only trying to help you. You can't just throw away everything we've done for you. You don't know what you're doing." I listened to the message without responding. The tone was different now. It wasn't as demanding or accusing as before. It was pleading. But it didn't matter. It was too late for apologies. The truth had to come out. I spent the rest of the day carefully crafting my message to the court, gathering all the evidence I could. I knew there would be consequences, that this would shake the family to its core. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I had to take a stand not just for myself, but for everyone else who had been deceived, who had been kept in the dark for so long. This wasn't just about me fighting back. It was about exposing the lies that had been hidden for years, about breaking free from the family's stranglehold. As the days went by, I waited. I watched as the calls continued, as the messages piled up, but I didn't respond. I had made my decision. And now, the consequences would unfold. The phone calls didn't stop. They came in waves, each one more frantic than the last. Rebecca was the first to call again, her voice filled with a mix of confusion and desperation. "Elena, please," she said. "We need to talk. I don't understand why you're doing this. We're your family. We're just trying to help you. This isn't how it was supposed to go. Please, just call me back." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I knew what she wanted, and I wasn't about to let her manipulate me again. Not after everything they had done. After what they had put me through. I had to hold my ground. Even though every part of me wanted to pick up the phone, hear her out, and let her convince me that it had all been a misunderstanding. But I couldn't do it. I was done letting them control my narrative. The next day, the messages came in, one after another. The first from Edward. His voice was cold, almost calculated, like he was trying to assert authority over me. "Elena, you can't just walk away from your family. You're being unreasonable. You need to come home and talk this through with us. This isn't what we wanted." I didn't call him back either. Then came Sarah. Her messages were different. She wasn't angry, not at first. She was sad, pleading, trying to pull me back into the fold. "Elena," she texted, "you have to understand. This is tearing Mom and Dad apart. They're really struggling with everything. You're making it worse. Please, just talk to us. We can work this out. You're not alone." I didn't respond to her messages either, but I couldn't help the guilt that crept in as I read them. Sarah had always been the peacekeeper, the one who tried to smooth things over. She didn't fully understand what had happened, or maybe she didn't want to. I knew she was caught in the middle, but I also knew she had a role in this. She had seen the way my parents treated me, and she had gone along with it. By the time Friday came around, the tone of the messages shifted. Rebecca, desperate, left another voicemail. "Elena, please. I don't know what happened, but you're breaking us. You can't just walk away from your family. I'm asking you to call us. Let's talk. Please." It was getting harder to ignore them, but I stayed strong. I didn't answer any of their calls. Instead, I spent my time going over everything. The files, the bank statements, the emails, anything I could find that would show exactly what they had done. I dug deeper into the family finances, cross-referencing records, comparing dates, and finding more inconsistencies. Every piece of information I uncovered added another layer to the story. It wasn't just about the missing inheritance money anymore. It was about years of hidden financial dealings, money siphoned off into accounts that no one knew about. I found more than I expected. The bank statements told a story of mismanagement, of funds being transferred to accounts that didn't seem to belong to anyone in the family. There were payments made that didn't match up with any bills or legitimate expenses. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that this was bigger than I had imagined. And then, I found the email. It was buried deep in one of their old accounts, something I hadn't noticed before. It was a series of messages between my parents, discussing the plan for my birthday dinner. I couldn't believe what I was reading. They had been plotting this for months, carefully laying out every detail of the humiliation. They had planned everything. The invoice, the photo tearing, the public dismissal. It wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was all calculated. I stared at the screen, feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could they do this? How could they treat me like this? They had known what they were doing the entire time. I spent the next few hours drafting my next steps. I was no longer just investigating. Now, I was preparing for a showdown. The truth had to come out. That night, as I sat in my apartment, the weight of what I had uncovered sank in. I knew the family was going to implode, but I couldn't feel sorry for them anymore. My parents had made their choices. They had put their image above everything, above me, above the truth. Now, they had to face the consequences. I sent a few more messages to family members. This time, I reached out to James, my cousin. He had always been quiet, more of an observer than a participant, but I knew he'd been watching everything unfold. I sent him a message. "James, I need to ask you something. Do you remember the college fund that Grandma set up for us? Do you know what happened to it?" His response came a few hours later. "I thought it had all been distributed. I never saw a dime of it. I figured it went into some family account. No one ever talked about it after Grandma passed." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The college fund, which was supposed to be for all the grandchildren, had been mishandled, another thing my parents had swept under the rug. The amount was significant, and yet, none of us had ever seen it. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep the lies went. This wasn't just about a family dinner gone wrong. This was about years of control, years of manipulation. It wasn't just my story, it was the story of every family member they had wronged. The calls didn't stop, but I didn't pick up. I couldn't. The more I pushed back, the more they tried to regain control. But this time it was too late. I had seen through their carefully constructed facade, and I wasn't going to let them put the pieces back together, not without facing the truth. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The family was starting to unravel. I was just getting started. By the time the weekend rolled around, the tension had reached its breaking point. My phone was blowing up with messages and missed calls from every angle. Each voicemail, each text, seemed like another desperate attempt to convince me to return to the fold. But I stood firm. I wasn't going back. Not after everything. I could hear my mother's voice in my head, pleading, asking for forgiveness, but I wouldn't give in. I knew what they were trying to do. They were trying to manipulate me back into their world, to get me to stop questioning them. But it was too late for that. I had already seen too much, learned too much. Still, the calls kept coming, and the weight of it all felt suffocating. I kept my silence, determined to move forward with my plan, even as my family spiraled. I had gathered enough evidence. The inheritance money, the college funds, the missing funds from the house sale. It was all there in black and white. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about everything they had hidden, everything they had kept from me. The lies were piling up, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. But as the days passed, something unexpected started to happen. The family, as it had always been, was beginning to unravel. The cracks were starting to show, and not just with me. Uncle Michael, the one who had always stayed on the periphery of family drama, was the first to make a move. He reached out to me, his message short and direct. "I've had enough of their lies, Elena. I'm going to take this to court. You were right about everything. They've been stealing from us for years." I stared at the message for a long time. Michael had always been a quiet observer, never one to rock the boat. But now, he was ready to confront the truth. This was the first real shift I had seen. He had seen the evidence, and he wasn't going to sit by quietly anymore. The next day, Aunt Laura called. I hadn't heard from her in years, but her voice on the other end of the line was sharp and direct. "Elena, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm with you. I've seen the papers. I've seen the truth. We can't let them keep lying to everyone." It was happening. The walls they had built around their lies were starting to collapse. More relatives reached out to me, some cautiously, others with a fire I hadn't expected. People were beginning to ask questions. People who had stayed silent for years were finally starting to speak up. But the real moment of change came when I got a call from James. His voice was low, almost defeated. "Elena, you've got to hear this. Mom and Dad are freaking out. They've been making calls to everyone in the family, trying to convince them that you've gone crazy. They're trying to turn everyone against you." I closed my eyes. The manipulation hadn't stopped. They were still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make me out to be the villain. It wasn't surprising, but it hurt more than I expected. They were using every weapon they had to twist the situation, to make me look like the problem when they were the ones who had created all of this. "They can't do this, Elena," James continued. "They're spreading lies about you, and I don't want to be part of it anymore. I know what they've done, and I can't keep covering for them." His words hit me hard. James had always been on their side, or at least, he had never made waves. But now he was standing with me. The support, though painful in its timing, felt like a small victory. The lies were unraveling, and the truth was coming out, piece by piece. I spent the next few hours piecing everything together, my hands shaking as I typed out emails to various family members, sharing the documents, the bank statements, the proof. I wasn't going to be silent anymore. I wasn't going to hide in the shadows of their perfect family. They were going to face the consequences of their actions. And then the confrontation happened. I got a call from my father, Edward. His voice was strained, almost desperate. "Elena," he began, "we need to talk. We need to work this out as a family. This whole thing has gotten out of hand. We're willing to sit down and explain everything. Just come home. We can fix this." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. He was still trying to control me, still trying to pull me back into the fold. What do you want, Dad? I asked, my voice steady but cold. We want to talk. We can fix this if you'll just listen, he said, almost pleading. I'm sorry for what happened, but we're a family, Elena. We can't let this tear us apart. I let the silence hang in the air between us for a moment. It's already torn apart, Dad. You just don't see it yet. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, but they were true. I had spent so long trying to be what they wanted, trying to keep the peace. But now I knew that peace was a lie. I hung up the phone before he could say anything else. I didn't need to hear the excuses anymore. The truth was out. The family was starting to crack. I had started something, and now it was too late for them to take it back. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of texts. They were desperate, pleading, accusing me of ruining everything. But I didn't care. They had ruined it first. They had built their empire on lies, and now it was falling apart. I had done what I needed to do. The consequences were inevitable. There was no going back. The family was unraveling, and I was no longer part of the narrative they had created. I was writing my own story now. It's been 30 days since my birthday dinner, and as I sit here in my apartment, listening to the ringing silence, I can't help but reflect on everything that's happened. The calls have slowed down, but they haven't stopped. Every day, there's a new voicemail or a missed call from one of them, but I no longer feel the weight of their demands. It's almost like I've been living in a different world, one where I finally control my own narrative. Rebecca's calls have gone from pleading to accusatory. She's angry, not at herself but at me. I'm the one who has ruined everything, she says. Edward's messages have shifted as well. At first, he was trying to make peace, but now, it's clear he's just trying to salvage his own reputation. I've seen the emails from them, begging me to meet, to make this all go away, but I've made it clear that I'm done. I haven't responded to any of their messages. Not a single one. It's strange how liberating it feels. I spent so many years trying to please them, trying to make them proud, even when I knew deep down that nothing I did would ever be enough. Now, I don't have to worry about their expectations anymore. The fallout from the truth is spreading, but it's not just about me anymore. It's about all of us. Uncle Michael has filed the formal complaint with the probate court, demanding an investigation into Grandma's estate. Aunt Laura has hired a lawyer to get her share of the house sale, the one that Edward and Rebecca tried to claim as their own. James has reached out to a lawyer about the missing college fund, and it's all happening because I pushed back. It feels surreal. The calls from Sarah have stopped. The last one came 2 weeks ago, and I haven't heard from her since. She was crying when she left the message. She was caught in the middle of this entire mess, but I can't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She had her part in all of this. She knew what was going on, and she chose to side with them. She wanted to pretend that everything was fine, that I was the one who was tearing the family apart. But she's not calling anymore, and I'm not sure if that's a relief or a loss. I'm not sure what's worse, the anger from my parents or the silence from Sarah. The anger is easier to understand. At least with them, I know where I stand. They want to rewrite history. They want to paint me as the villain, to make it all my fault. But Sarah's silence feels like a betrayal. She was always the one who tried to smooth things over, who acted as the peacekeeper. But now, she's gone. I think about the time we used to spend together, the way I used to look up to her. She had always been the golden child, the one who did everything they asked, who played the part so perfectly. But now, I see it differently. I see the way she enabled them, the way she let them control her just as much as they tried to control me. The truth has a way of stripping everything down, doesn't it? Once the lies are exposed, you can't go back to pretending. You can't unsee what's been revealed. And that's the hardest part, the realization that there's no going back. I've watched as my parents tried to salvage their reputation. They've done everything they can to turn the story around, to make it seem like I'm the one in the wrong. They're not fooling anyone, though. Not anymore. The lies have caught up to them, and they can't escape the truth. The court is involved now. Michael and Laura are pushing for answers. I've seen the papers, the legal notices. They're in trouble. And it's all because they tried to destroy me. I still remember the way they looked at me that night, the coldness in their eyes. They thought they could break me, that they could teach me a lesson, but all they did was make me stronger. They pushed me to a place where I no longer cared about their approval, about their love. I realized that I had spent my whole life bending myself to fit their image, trying to be what they wanted me to be. but I'm not that person anymore. I've learned that the only person I need to be is myself. I've learned that family doesn't always mean unconditional love. Sometimes, it means standing up for yourself, even if it means losing everything. And I have lost everything. But in a way, I've gained more than I ever had before. I've gained the truth. I've gained my freedom. As I sit here, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realize that this is just the beginning. The family I knew is gone, but I'm not the one who destroyed it. I'm the one who finally broke free. And that's something I can live with. It's over now. There's nothing left for them to take from me. They've lost their power, and I've found my own.